Before we begin, Galactic Horrors is now on Patreon. Get daily stories in one place, with no ads and no interruptions. Link is in the description or search Galactic Horrors on Patreon. Now, let's begin the transmission. The shuttle dropped through the intake port at 600 meters per second, and Dennis Foster grabbed the edge of his console hard enough to bend the safety rail. "Deceleration in 4, Boyd said from the command seat. "Collier, strap in or lose your teeth." I pulled the harness over my chest and locked it. Outside the view screen, metal walls curved inward around us, smooth and engineered, like the throat of something that had swallowed the shuttle whole. Impact lighting fired in sequence along the shaft, blue-white pulses spaced every 40 meters, marking our descent into KOI 7211b. 20 months of travel had brought us here. Before that came 2 years of funding battles and theoretical defenses. My argument that a shared alien religious architecture might exist across species, that 3 separate dead civilizations, divided by thousands of light-years and millions of years, had each built fragments of the same devotional mathematics. When I published the correlation paper, the Bekenstein Foundation sent a probe. It returned with images of the planet's interior, cathedral corridors, inscribed walls, infrastructure still drawing power from a source the instruments could not identify. The Foundation assembled the expedition in 9 weeks. Boyd to command, Foster for structural engineering, Rick Farnham on security, Lyle Beckett for geology, Tom Gomez on systems, and me, the only theoretical theologian in the Foundation's employ, who had spent 2 decades arguing that alien faith was more than cultural artifact. The retro burn hit. My organs compressed against my spine. The shuttle groaned through its frame, slowing from terminal velocity to landing speed in seconds. White sparks drifted across my vision. "Touchdown on the intake platform," Gomez called from navigation. "Gravity reads 0.86 standard. Atmosphere thin but breathable. Nitrogen-oxygen mix, low humidity." "Pressure suits stay on until I say otherwise," Boyd said. He was already unstrapping, pulling himself forward. He wore that record the way some men wear rank, quietly, but as the first thing they would kill to protect. Before every mission, he gave the same briefing in the same flat voice. Discovery did not count as survival, and nobody under his command died to satisfy a specialist's curiosity. The ramp dropped. Beyond it, the intake platform extended into a corridor wide enough for freight vehicles, lined with the same engineered metal as the shaft above. The temple's own lighting continued here, activating section by section ahead of us. Each panel warmed from dark to pale blue, the sequence advancing down the corridor like a path being offered. Foster stepped onto the platform beside me. He always touched new structures with 2 fingers before trusting his weight to them, an engineer's superstition he refused to call superstition. "It knows we're here," he said. "It's automated," I said. "Motion-triggered, probably." "Motion-triggered systems don't sequence like that." He pointed down the corridor. The lights activated ahead of us and stayed lit behind us. The activation moved with clear directionality, always deeper, always inward. "That's guidance. Something is routing us." Boyd came down the ramp with Farnham and Beckett behind him. Farnham had his sidearm drawn, which Boyd noticed but did not correct. Rick Farnham drew early and apologized never. That habit had annoyed half the Foundation's science staff and saved 2 survey teams before I met him. Beckett looked up at the corridor's impossible curve and let out a soft field camp whistle. "Geology is going to be the wrong word for all of this, isn't it?" "Probably," I said. Boyd turned to me. "Collier, you're on point with me. This is your field. Tell me what we're walking into." I told him what I knew, which was less than I wanted to admit. The probe images had shown devotional inscriptions, matching mathematical patterns from 3 dead civilization sites. The Kepler 442 burial complex, the LHS 1140 orbital shrine, and the subsurface temple network on Ross 128c. Each site used a common mathematical ratio in its sacred architecture, expressing gravitational constants as spatial relationships built into walls, floors, and ceremonial platforms. The same ratios, three species that never contacted one another, building the same numbers into their places of worship. "And this place has all three," Boyd said. "This place has all three arranged in sequences I've never seen before. The dead sites used them decoratively, carved into walls, pressed into floor tiles. Here, the probe images showed them arranged in operational patterns. Instructions? Possibly. Instructions for what? That's what I'm here to find out." Boyd's visor turned toward the corridor, then toward the shuttle behind us. "Measuring route, risk, retreat." "We proceed to first junction and reassess," he said. "Stay together, touch nothing without my order." Then he started walking, and the corridor pulled us in. The first gravitational anomaly hit 300 meters in, a sudden drag like walking into a headwind made of weight. My boots pressed harder into the deck. Foster's instruments chirped, and he stopped to read them. "Fluctuation," he said. "Local gravity just jumped to 1.2 standard. Now it's dropping. 0.95, 0.9, back to baseline." He frowned at the display. I knew that look. Foster liked systems with visible load paths. This place had given him a force without a structure to blame for it. "That's active cycling," he said. "Passive mass gives you a steady gradient. This is oscillation. Something is managing the gravitational field." "Dampening system?" I asked. "Maybe, but dampening what? The planet's total mass doesn't justify this kind of management. Something else is generating pull in here." We moved deeper. The corridor branched, and the temple chose for us, lighting only the leftward passage and leaving the right in darkness. The inscriptions began at the junction. Cut into the metal walls at chest height, they ran in unbroken lines beyond the reach of my helmet lamp. I recognized the mathematical structures immediately. Gravitational constants expressed as ratios, mass-to-distance relationships, orbital period calculations, tidal force equations. But here they were connected by operational symbols I had never catalogued. Linkages turned static numbers into sequences. If the dead civilization inscriptions were individual words, these were sentences. "This is procedural," I said, running my gloved hand along the inscribed line without touching it. "These are steps in a process." "What kind of process?" Boyd asked. I had no answer yet. What I did have was pulling my attention away from him and toward the wall itself. The metal between the inscribed lines had deformed, a shape pressed outward from inside it. A body, alien. Six-limbed, broad-skulled, compressed into the wall, as if the metal had been liquid when the body was placed and then hardened around it. The limbs were arranged in a precise, angular posture, each joint bent to a specific degree. The pose was too exact to be accidental. It looked devotional before I understood that it was also structural. "Commander," Farnham said from behind us. He had found another one. Farther down the corridor, a different species, bipedal, elongated, its remains flattened into relief against the wall. Same angular limb positioning. I counted 7 more bodies in the next 50 meters. Each had a different anatomy. Each was installed in the same devotional grammar, limbs expressing the gravitational ratios inscribed in the metal around them. Beckett had gone silent. His lamp moved from body to body, carefully avoiding the faces. At last he said, "They aren't buried." "They're installed," I said. Foster's voice was lower than before. "Load-bearing?" "In a sense." The bodies were components. Their positions were more than symbolic. Mass had been placed at mathematically specific points. Boyd turned to me. "You pushed us past the perimeter survey to follow these inscriptions. Tell me this is worth it." "Commander, this is the most significant xenotheological site ever discovered. Their positions correspond to the gravitational constants around them. This entire corridor is a machine, and the bodies are part of its engineering." Boyd stared at me through his visor, measuring the cost against the claim. Then he looked down the corridor, where the temple's lights still advanced, still guiding. "We go to the next chamber," he said. Return route stays open or we pull back. I heard the concession more clearly than the condition. We went deeper. The cathedral corridors opened around us without warning. One moment the passage was wide but enclosed. The next, the ceiling vaulted upward and vanished. The walls curved away in both directions, and we stood on a metal surface that extended to a horizon bending upward at its edges. The inner surface of the planetary shell lay visible here at true scale for the first time. Bodies filled the walls. Thousands of them. The corridor had shown us 7. The cathedral held legions. Alien remains of at least a dozen anatomies were pressed into every surface. Walls, support columns, arched buttresses, the undersides of elevated platforms. Each body followed the devotional grammar I had decoded in the corridor, limbs arranged at gravitational constant angles. Some were intact enough to show musculature, joint structures, and skull configurations from species no human had catalogued. Others were compressed into abstract shapes, spread across meters of wall space like murals made from bone and tissue. The dead faced inward. Every collapsed orbit, every skull and sensory cluster pointed toward the center of the planet. Foster found the dampener. We felt it before we saw it. A vibration rising through the deck plates, cycling every 9 seconds. The machine was the size of a city block, half embedded in the cathedral wall where the main chamber opened onto a secondary vault. Its housing was the same metal as the walls, featureless except for a row of polished silver ports at its base. Each port was a meter wide, recessed into a shaped aperture that looked disturbingly like a mouth. The priest machine knelt before the nearest port. It was built from the temple's metal, bipedal, roughly humanoid in proportion, but wrong in its joints, its limbs bending in too many places. From a reservoir panel in the floor, it drew biological tissue, dark and preserved and processed into uniform blocks, then fed each block into the silver port with the careful placement of a communicant, setting an offering on an altar. The port accepted each block with a brief contraction. The metal aperture closed around the tissue, held it, then opened again. Inside the dampener's housing, something consumed what was given. Foster watched a full cycle without speaking. His jaw shifted once inside his helmet. "It's fueling the dampener," he said at last. "Biological matter as an energy substrate. The dampener is converting organic material into gravitational compensation." "How much does it need?" Boyd asked. "At this cycling rate, a lot." Foster looked down at his instruments, then past them at the bodies in the walls. "And there are more dampeners. I'm reading 6 within a 1-kilometer radius, all active, all at similar output levels. The maintenance demand for this network would be enormous, constant." He stopped there. He had finished the thought without saying it. I looked at the bodies in the walls, the thousands of offerings installed at calibrated positions, their mass contributing to the local gravitational architecture. Then, I looked at the priest machine drawing tissue from its reservoir and feeding the silver mouth. The supply chain was the temple. Every body, every pilgrim, every offering. All of it maintained the gravitational system. A liturgical terminal stood near the dampener, a devotional input station, inscribed with the same mathematical language as the walls. It was designed for a congregant to interact with the temple's systems through gravitational grammar. I recognized the logic from the corridor inscriptions. Input sequences here. Receive system responses. Calibrate output through devotional mathematics. "I can read this," I said. "Collier," Boyd said. "I can interface with it. The mathematical language is the same framework I've studied for 20 years. The dead civilization fragments were pieces of this operating system. I can cross-reference them with the operational sequences on these walls and start building a functional vocabulary." Boyd looked at the terminal, then at the kneeling machine, then at me. "What happens if it rejects your input?" "I don't know." That was not the answer I wanted. It's the honest one. He watched me the way he had watched the corridor when deciding whether to go deeper. "You have 2 hours," he said. "Document what you can. Foster monitors the field. The moment anything changes, we pull back. I put my hands on the terminal and began working. The system responded. The liturgical language accepted my inputs. Imperfect, clumsy, but recognizable enough to generate returns. Data cascaded across the terminal's display surface, inscribed in light on the air itself. Gravitational mathematics flowed in sequences that mapped the dampener's operating parameters. Mass budgets, compensation ratios, cycling frequencies, the precise relationship between biological input and gravitational output. I did not notice the change in the temple until Foster grabbed my arm. "Something's changed below us," he said. Beneath the dampener's 9-second cycle, a new vibration had started. Deeper, farther away, rising through the shell. The deck plates carried a second rhythm now, erratic and searching, like a heartbeat trying to find its pace. Down the cathedral corridor, beyond the range of our lights, doors cycled. Metal surfaces shifted, producing low groans that travelled through the temple's structure like signals through a wire. "That started about 6 minutes after you activated the terminal," Foster said. "The temple registered my input. It's responding to liturgical engagement." "And what does the temple do when someone worships in it?" I looked at the bodies in the walls, at the priest machine kneeling at the silver mouth, at the terminal whose display was still opening itself to me. Every question I had ever published was answerable from this console. Boyd's 2-hour limit tightened around my throat. "Collier," Foster said, "I need one more sequence." Boyd heard me. "You have 10 minutes. I took 9. The observation gallery was 3 levels below the cathedral. Accessed through a transit shaft, the temple opened after I entered a navigational sequence at the terminal. Boyd did not like it. The temple choosing our route, doors opening ahead while corridors behind us remained passable but dark. He posted Farnham at our rear and kept Beckett and Gomez in the middle, with Foster and me on point. "Anything closes behind us, we turn around," Boyd said. The route stayed open. That should have comforted us. The gallery was built for viewing. Tiered platforms descended toward a railing that overlooked the interior of the planetary shell. The hollow core, the central void, the space everything else had been built around. Devotional stations lined each tier, their terminals oriented inward, their inscriptions all expressing a single imperative. Look. We looked. The entity hung at the center of the void, a mass the size of a mountain, so dense it bent the temple's internal lighting around its edges, warping the glow into arcs that curved and vanished behind its silhouette. It was black in a way that made the surrounding darkness seem bright, a gravitational shadow defined by the light that fell into it and did not return. Rings of biomass orbited it, slow, concentric, drifting in paths that decayed visibly over the minutes we stood watching. Tissue, bone, and whole preserved bodies spiraled inward on trajectories that ended at its surface. The outer rings held intact specimens. I could see anatomical structures from species I recognized in the cathedral walls, their bodies tumbling in weightless procession. Closer to the entity, tidal forces had done their work. Bodies stretched into filaments of matter that wrapped around the orbital paths like threads wound onto a spindle. Closer still, the filaments thinned to nothing. "Oh, God!" Beckett whispered. "What is that?" "Possibly," I said, and meant it more literally than he did. Foster had his instruments on the railing, scanning. "The mass is... This is wrong." He recalibrated, scanned again. "The entity's mass is approximately 4 times 10 to the 22nd kilograms, lunar scale, concentrated in a volume maybe 300 meters across." "Density?" Boyd asked. "Off any chart I have, and it's increasing." Foster lowered his instruments, then raised them again, as if the second gesture might produce mercy. "The mass reading is climbing while I watch," he said. "Slowly, but measurably. That biomass in orbit is feeding it. The entity is accreting matter. The dampeners, the priest machines, the biological reservoirs, the bodies in the walls. The system assembled itself in my mind with the clarity of a mathematical proof resolving to its conclusion. The dampeners managed the entity's gravity, preventing it from collapsing the temple shell inward. They consumed biological matter to power that compensation. Surplus biomass fed the entity directly, increasing its mass with every cycle. The temple was a growth engine, a machine for making a god heavier. If the dampeners fail, I asked Foster. The entity's gravity collapses the shell. Everything in here folds inward. The temple crumples around the central mass. And if the dampeners keep running? He understood the question. The entity keeps growing. Each cycle adds mass. The dampeners compensate for the increased gravity, allowing the next feeding cycle. The system stabilizes at each new level. He turned from the void. It's a ratchet. There's no ceiling except the point where the entity's gravitational influence extends beyond the planet. The anomalies that flagged this system, I said. The ones the Foundation detected 2 years ago. Early signs. The entity's gravity is already leaking past the dampener network. Small perturbations in the local stellar neighborhood. Give it enough feeding cycles and it reaches a critical threshold. Past that point, it starts capturing external mass. Stars, Beckett said. Foster did not look at him. Eventually, I turned back to the gallery's liturgical terminal. The largest, most complex I had found yet, a command-level interface designed for whatever had served as high priest in the civilization that built this place. Boyd stepped between me and the terminal. Leave it. Commander, this may contain the primary control architecture. I said, leave it. If we go without understanding the system, we go without knowing whether it can be stopped. We are standing inside the thing that keeps it from killing us. You touch that terminal, and the temple changes again. He was right. I looked past him at the entity, at the rings of dead matter, at the gravitational shadow bending light around itself. I can map the dampener network from here, I said. Here is the only place with that access. Boyd's face hardened behind the visor. He knew the shape of what I was doing. So did I. I was placing knowledge on one side and risk on the other, then asking him to call it necessity. One query, he said. Foster stands over your shoulder. The second anything moves, you stop. I entered the command sequence. The data confirmed what I already suspected, but had not been willing to name. The prayers inscribed throughout the temple were dampener calibration commands. Every devotional sequence encoded a gravitational adjustment. Every sacred ratio was an engineering parameter. The priesthood had operated the machines through worship. Each prayer cycle adjusted compensation across the dampener network, maintaining the precise balance that allowed the entity to grow inside the structure that contained it. I was deep in the archive when Boyd's voice snapped across the gallery. The exits had reconfigured. 2 of the 3 transit shafts that had brought us down were sealed, their former doorways replaced by smooth metal, as if the openings had never existed. The 3rd shaft was open, but it led downward, deeper, toward the entity. The tiered platforms of the gallery were shifting subtly, their angles adjusting by fractions of a degree, tilting inward. Farnham, report, Boyd said into his comm. Farnham had been posted 30 meters back at the gallery's upper entrance. His voice came through distorted by a low vibration that had not been in the signal before. The corridor behind me just sealed. I've got a new passage opening to my left. It's moving. A pause. The floor is angled. Commander, the floor is pulling me. I'm bracing, but the angle is increasing. Hold position. We're coming to you. I can't hold. It's past 40 degrees and the surface is too smooth. I'm sliding. Commander, I'm... A sound came through the comm. Farnham's boots losing purchase on tilted metal. Then motion, acceleration, the grunt of a body being pulled by something stronger than muscle. His breathing came in ragged bursts. He was trying to say something, but the effort of fighting the pull took everything he had. His signal held for 90 seconds. During that time, we heard him slide, catch himself briefly, lose his grip, and slide faster. His breathing changed, compressed and labored, as if the air was being squeezed from his lungs by external pressure. The last sound before the signal cut was wet and structural, like a joint being forced past its designed range of motion. Boyd looked at me. The command-level access, the deep archive query. The temple had registered my liturgical engagement at the highest interface level and reclassified us. Its automated systems had accepted us as a new congregation, living biological material that had engaged with the liturgical infrastructure and could now be processed through the pilgrimage system. I had asked the temple what it was. The temple had answered by making us part of itself. Boyd was still looking at me. Farnham's empty comm channel hissed between us. At the upper entrance, all that remained of him was his equipment pack, torn loose and smeared with what the corridor had taken from him. I picked it up without thinking. The only open transit shaft led downward, toward the central mass, toward the rings of orbiting dead. "The way out is through," I said. The temple had left us one route. The dampener control systems were deeper in the structure. Stopping now meant Farnham had died for data I had not finished understanding. Every reason I had was true, and every one of them served the same hunger that had brought us here. Boyd moved for the open shaft. He did not answer me. The look he gave me before he started the descent said everything his discipline would not let him speak, that he had been commanding expeditions for 20 years, and he could tell the difference between a man following necessity and a man using necessity as permission. The transit shaft deposited us into a staging chamber where the air itself felt heavier. My suit's gravity readout showed 1.3 standard and climbing. Boyd had Beckett and Gomez in formation behind him, moving fast, checking corners. Foster stayed close to me, his instruments sweeping the chamber's walls, reading field strength at every surface. The chamber opened onto the bridge. I had seen pilgrimage infrastructure in the dead civilization sites, ceremonial pathways, processional avenues, transit corridors designed to move bodies toward a sacred center. Those were ruins, architectural fossils. This bridge was alive, and the scale of it stopped all 5 of us at the threshold. It spanned the inner void of the planet, a metal pathway 30 meters wide, arching downward in a long curve toward the entity's silhouette at the center of the hollow sphere. From this angle, looking along its length, I could see the full processional system. The bridge descended, reached its lowest point at the nearest approach to the entity, then rose again toward the far shell wall, where the primary dampener complex reflected the entity's distorted light. The bridge was the only route across. The temple had sealed everything else. Platforms moved along tracks set into the bridge's surface. Flat, metal, each one roughly 4 meters square. Loaded platforms descended toward the entity. Empty platforms returned. The loaded ones carried cargo from deep storage chambers accessed through the staging areas we had passed. Biological cargo. Preserved alien specimens, thawed and partially reanimated by priest machines stationed at loading points along the bridge's upper sections. The specimens stood upright on the platforms, held in place by clamp assemblies at their ankles and wrists, their bodies slack but breathing. Their eyes moved. "They're conscious," Foster said. The silence confirmed it. The reanimation was crude, enough metabolic function to sustain tissue viability, enough neural activity to keep the eyes tracking and the chest expanding. The priest machines had revived these bodies from preservation for one purpose, and the purpose became visible as the platforms descended. The gravity gradient along the bridge was savage. At the upper sections where we stood, 1.3 standard. At the midpoint, where the bridge curved closest to the entity, the gradient would be far worse. I could see its effects on the descending platforms. The specimens changed as they moved deeper. Limbs stretched, torsos elongated, skulls deformed, pulling toward the entity's center of mass, bone visibly distorting under tidal stress. A 6-limbed specimen on a platform 200 meters below us was coming apart as I watched. Its upper limbs separated from the torso at the shoulder joints, the tissue between them thinning into strands that caught the gravitational current, and spiraled outward into the orbiting rings of biomass. The specimen's mouth was open. If it made any sound, distance swallowed it. Beckett made a small noise beside me. He had stopped looking at the entity and was watching the loaded platforms instead. His gloved hands held close to his chest as if he could keep his own body from being understood by the place. "We cross on the return platforms," Boyd said. "Empty ones moving toward the far wall. We stay low and fast. Collier, how bad is the gravity at the midpoint?" "The gradient peaks at the lowest arc of the bridge. Based on Foster's readings, I'd estimate 2.5 to 3 standard. Survivable in suits, but we'll be carrying triple our weight. Then we move before it gets worse. The entity is feeding. Every hour we spend in here, the gradient climbs." We stepped onto the bridge. The return platforms moved at walking speed, empty metal squares gliding past us on their tracks. Boyd timed a gap and stepped onto the nearest one, pulling Gomez after him. I boarded the next platform with Foster. Beckett took the one behind us. The descent began at once. The bridge curved downward, and with every 10 meters of drop, the weight increased. My suit's readout climbed past 1.5. My boots pressed harder into the platform. My knees bent under the additional load. Beside me, Foster leaned forward, compensating for the shift in his center of gravity. His instruments clutched against his chest. The loaded platforms passed us on the descending track while we rode the empty return line across the arc. I could see the specimens at close range now. An alien body clamped upright on a platform 8 meters to my right, its torso already stretched to twice its original length, its limbs pulling in different directions as the tidal gradient worked on every joint at once. The eyes were still moving. They tracked me as the platform carried the body past. For a moment the gaze held, fixed on me with an awareness that the crude reanimation should not have permitted. Then the platform carried it deeper. The body began to come apart. The eyes went with the skull as it separated from the spine in a long, wet extension of tissue that thinned until it broke. The gravity at the midpoint hit like a wall of pressure. 2.7 standard, Foster's instrument said, though I did not need the number. My organs sagged inside my body. My vision narrowed. Each breath required effort, my chest muscles fighting the compression of my lungs under their own increased mass. The platform beneath us groaned on its track, the mechanisms straining. Ahead, Boyd's platform had reached the lowest point of the arc and begun the climb toward the far wall. He was on his hands and knees. So was Gomez. Behind us, Beckett's voice tore through the comm. I turned slowly, because the gravity made every motion expensive. Beckett's platform had crossed into a dampener cycling zone, a localized pocket where one of the bridge-mounted dampeners was oscillating at peak intensity. The gravity in his section spiked past anything the bridge was designed to deliver to a walking congregant. His platform buckled, the metal bending downward toward the void. Beckett was on his stomach, clawing at the surface, but the pull was directional, inward, toward the entity, strong enough to drag him across the metal towards the open edge. Boyd tried to move. Even from 20 meters ahead, even under that weight, he tried. He got one knee under him and reached as if distance were a thing command could overrule. Beckett went over. The fall was slow at first. The gravity here pulled inward, so his body drifted off the platform and hung in the void, suspended between the bridge's local field and the entity's deeper pull. Then the deeper pull won. He began to move inward, accelerating gradually, his body starting the same elongation I had watched on the alien specimens. His arms stretched first, then his legs. His suit ruptured along the seams as his frame expanded beyond its designed proportions. He was trying to speak on the comm, but the compression of his chest had changed the shape of his lungs. What came through was a thin, high sound that carried no words. He drifted into the orbiting ring of biomass. Within seconds, his body was indistinguishable from the rest of the rubble circling the entity's mass, another strand of biological matter being wound slowly inward. The platform carried me and Foster past the midpoint and up the ascending slope. The gravity eased with every meter of climb. Boyd's platform reached the far staging area first. By the time Foster and I stepped off the bridge onto solid decking, Boyd was waiting. He hit me with his full weight. The impact slammed me into the wall of the staging chamber. His forearm pinned my chest. His face was close enough that I could see broken capillaries in his eyes from the pressure of the crossing. "You knew," he said, "from the moment you pushed us past the perimeter survey. You knew this might happen, and you weighed it. You put the Discovery on one side and the lives on the other, and you picked the Discovery. We can still get out. The dampener complex is right here. If I can access the primary controls, I can... Farnham is dead because you wanted to read the walls. Beckett is dead because you wanted to go deeper. You made that calculation, Collier. Don't dress it up as something else." He released me, stepped back. His face had the rigid control of a man who would break something if he did not hold still. 2 crew members gone. His record shattered. Every death traceable to a decision he had authorized because his specialist told him the Discovery was worth the risk. He was right. I had made that calculation at the first junction, when the inscriptions pulled me deeper. I had made it at the liturgical terminal, when the data was extraordinary, and the time limit felt like a leash. I had made it at the gallery, when the archive opened, and I kept working while the temple reconfigured around us. Each time the knowledge justified the cost. Each time someone else paid. Foster found the observation aperture while Boyd and Gomez secured the staging area. A massive viewport in the outer shell, looking outward into open space. Through it, the expedition ship was visible in orbit. The hull had deformed. The cylindrical body had stretched toward the planet, its midsection thinning, its profile bowing into a crescent as the gravitational anomaly pulled unevenly on the structure. Seam panels along the port side had separated, exposing interior bulkheads. The running lights stuttered in patterns I recognized from emergency drills. Structural stress warnings, automated distress cycling. "It's been getting worse since we entered the temple," Foster said. "The entity has been fed during our time in here. Farnham, Beckett, whatever the automated reservoirs have been cycling through the procession." He ran calculations on his instrument display, fingers moving fast. When he spoke again, the engineer's detachment had thinned to something harder. "At the current rate of mass accumulation, the entity reaches critical gravitational threshold within 72 hours. Past that point, its influence extends beyond the planetary shell. It starts with orbital debris and nearby bodies, then the inner planets. Cascade disruption propagates outward through the system." "And our system?" Gomez asked. Foster glanced at him. "The local stellar neighborhood destabilizes over decades. Orbital perturbations, tidal disruptions, captured bodies, a slow-motion gravitational collapse that starts here and radiates outward." Through the viewport, the ship bent further toward us. A section of hull plating detached in silence, spinning slowly as it fell toward the temple's surface. I found Boyd in the staging chamber. He was checking Gomez's suit integrity, preparing for the return trip across the bridge. "Commander, even if we evacuate, the entity keeps growing. The automated systems will keep feeding it from the remaining reservoirs. 72 hours from now, the gravitational threshold breaks and this thing starts eating the system." "That's above my pay grade, Collier. I'll flag it to the Foundation when we're clear." "The Foundation is months away. The threshold is 3 days. The only people who can stop this are standing in this room." Boyd looked at me. "What are you proposing?" "The dampeners are operated through the liturgical language. I can read that language. If I input a corrupted calibration sequence into the primary dampener's interface, a wrong prayer, deliberately miscalibrated, it should cause a feedback loop that propagates through the network. The gravitational management grid crashes. The feeding process collapses." "Should?" "I know the language. I know the logic. But the system is old, partially automated, and not built for human intervention. I can crash it. I can't promise what shape the collapse takes." And the temple collapses inward around the entity's uncompensated mass. The structure folds. Everything inside is destroyed, including you. The dampener crash creates a brief window of gravitational equilibrium. Chaotic, unfocused, with the pull diffused across the collapsing network. A shuttle might launch during that window. Boyd stared at me for a long time. Then he turned to Gomez. We head for the shuttle. We wait for the launch window Collier is promising. If the window doesn't come, we launch anyway and take our chances. He looked back at me. You built this mess, Collier. You can die in it if you want. He paused. But if you give me that window, I'll wait for it. They left through a corridor the temple had opened toward the outer shell, away from the entity, toward the intake platform where the shuttle sat. Boyd moved with the same posture he had carried since landing, a man doing what he was trained to do, getting his remaining crew out of a situation someone else had made lethal. Foster stayed. The corruption needs to propagate through the entire dampener network, not just the primary unit, he said. You should go with them. I know what I should do. Dennis. He looked at me then, calmly. The liturgical interface handles the calibration software, the command language, the operating parameters, but the hardware has physical override panels inside the dampener structure. If I lock the corrupted calibration into the overrides, the priest machines can't restart the correct sequence from another terminal. The corruption becomes permanent. The override panels are inside the dampener. The gravity in there, I know what the gravity is. We moved together toward the primary dampener complex. The complex was a cathedral inside the cathedral, a single vast chamber, tall enough that the thin atmosphere hazed at its upper reaches, dominated by the primary dampener's housing, a column of engineered metal 60 meters across, rising from floor to ceiling, vibrating with the deep 9-second cycle I had felt since the first corridor. Silver intake ports lined its base in a ring, each one attended by a priest machine performing the feeding ceremony. 6 priest machines moved in synchronized liturgical patterns around the dampener's base, their multi-jointed limbs carrying biological material from reservoir ports in the floor to the silver mouths in precise sequences timed to the gravitational cycle. Every 9 seconds the dampener pulsed. Every 9 seconds the machines fed it. Every 9 seconds the gravitational compensation adjusted across the network. Their movements matched the inscriptions I had been reading all day, the same gravitational ratios, the same calibration relationships, written in motion. The liturgical interface stood on a raised platform near the dampener's base, between 2 of the silver intake ports. A command-level terminal, identical in design to the one in the observation gallery. I could read its inscription language from the chamber entrance: activation sequence, input protocols, calibration framework. The problem was the lock. The interface required a biological offering to activate. The system architecture treated calibration and feeding as a single sacrament. You could not adjust the dampener without also feeding it. The access protocol was the offering itself. I had Farnham's equipment pack. I had carried it since the gallery, an automatic retrieval. You did not leave gear behind on an expedition. The pack's exterior was smeared with biological residue from the corridor where the temple had taken him. Blood, tissue, material that had been inside Rick Farnham's body hours ago. Foster saw what I was looking at. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he said, "Do it." I scraped what I could from the pack's surface into my gloved hands, dark matter, already cooling, thick against my palms. I walked to the liturgical interface. The priest machines tracked my movement but did not intercept. I was approaching the terminal in the posture of a congregant, carrying an offering. The system recognized the pattern. I fed the silver mouth. Pressed Farnham's remains into the polished metal aperture with both hands. The port contracted around the material, accepted it. Inside the dampener's housing, the consumption cycle engaged. The interface activated. its display surface lit with the gravitational mathematics I had spent the day learning to read. The calibration parameters laid open for adjustment. Foster moved at once. The maintenance hatch was 30 meters to my left, recessed into the base of the dampener behind a row of intake ports. He crossed low, keeping clear of the priest machines, and forced the hatch open with a manual override tool. The hatch irised just wide enough for his suited body. Beyond it, the interior of the dampener glowed with silver-blue field light. He looked back once, then he climbed inside. I began inputting the corrupted sequence. The mathematics came easier than it should have. 20 years of theoretical framework, 20 hours of practical immersion, the liturgical language flowing through my hands into the terminal with a fluency that frightened me. I knew what each ratio controlled. I knew which parameters to invert, which cycle timings to skew, which compensation values to push past their stability margins. The corrupted prayer took shape on the display, a calibration that would overcorrect the gravitational compensation, feeding the dampener instructions that demanded more output than the system could sustain. A feedback loop designed to cascade through every networked dampener in the temple. The priest machines noticed. The two nearest constructs abandoned their feeding positions and converged on the terminal, their multi-jointed limbs reaching for the interface surface. They began entering correction sequences, the proper calibration, the orthodox prayer, the right numbers meant to override my wrong ones. The dampener received both inputs and cycled erratically, its 9-second rhythm breaking into stuttered bursts as it tried to reconcile contradictory instructions. I kept typing. The priest machines kept correcting. The dampener oscillated between states, my corruption pulling it toward overload, their correction pulling it back toward stability. The contest played out in gravitational waves that rippled through the chamber floor, each oscillation stronger than the last. "Foster, I need those overrides locked. The machines are fighting me." His voice came through the comm, already distorted. "I'm at the first panel, locking in the corruption parameters now." A pause. Heavy breathing. "Gravity in here is above 3 standard, increasing with each cycle." A third priest machine left its feeding station and approached me. It reached past the terminal for my arms, trying to pull my hands from the interface surface. I drove my shoulder into its torso and shoved it back. It weighed very little, but it came back immediately. The other two continued entering corrections, their inputs maintaining the stability sequence while mine tried to break it. "Second panel locked," Foster said. His voice was thinner, compressed. "Third panel is farther in. The housing is deforming, metals bending inward." I increased the corruption parameters, pushed the overcorrection further. The dampener lurched, its cycle breaking from stuttered bursts into a sustained vibration that shook the chamber floor. The priest machine's corrections faltered, then resumed. The third machine caught my left wrist, its fingers closed with mechanical pressure, pulling my hand from the display. I slammed my helmet into its head assembly. The impact rang through my skull. The machine staggered half a step. Not enough. I hooked my boot behind one of its lower joints and shoved again, sending it sideways into a silver intake port just as the aperture opened for the next offering. The port closed on its arm. Metal screamed against metal. The machine strained to free itself, caught in the mouth of the god it served. "Third panel locked," Foster said. The feedback loop engaged. A deep structural groan traveled through the temple's metal. Networked dampeners across the planetary shell had received the corrupted calibration and were trying to execute it. The gravitational field in the chamber spiked, dropped, then spiked in a perpendicular direction. One of the priest machines at the terminal lost its footing and fell. The other kept correcting, but the cascade had propagated. The corruption was in the network now, spreading through every dampener connected to the primary unit. "Foster, get out! The cascade is running!" Silence on the comm. "Foster, respond." Static. Then his voice came back, strained past recognition. "Fourth panel, locking now." The gravity in here is… I can't stand. I'm on my hands. The panel is close. I just need… The dampener's housing groaned. A section of its exterior surface buckled inward, the metal compressing toward the center as the gravitational chaos inside the structure pulled it past design tolerance. Foster's comm channel transmitted a sound I will remember for the rest of my career. The sound of a man's breathing changing as the weight on his chest exceeds what his ribs can support. "Fourth is locked," he said. Each syllable came crushed flat. Then the channel went to static. The corruption propagated. Around the chamber, the other priest machines stopped their feeding cycles. They stood motionless, their programming unable to process a liturgical state where the calibration language itself had been made false. The dampener's vibration climbed past anything the chamber could contain. The silver intake ports cracked. The reservoir panels in the floor buckled. I ran. The corridors behind me were dying. Walls bent inward as the dampener network failed across the temple, the gravitational compensation dropping sector by sector, the entity's raw pull beginning to crush the shell that had contained it. Floor plates buckled under my boots, support columns twisted. The cathedral corridors I had walked through hours before were compressing, their vast scale shrinking as the metal folded. The bodies in the walls, the devotional offerings, the calibrated dead, were being pulled from their positions. Ancient remains tumbled through corridors, collapsing around them. The temple's guidance systems were dead. I navigated by memory and by the direction of the gravitational pull, moving against it, climbing toward the outer shell where the shuttle waited. Every corridor was a race against deformation, metal closing behind me, passages narrowing as I passed through them. The structure groaning with the sound of a planet folding itself around a mass it could no longer support. The shuttle bay was buckling when I reached it. The intake platform where we had landed was tilted 15 degrees inward. The shuttle sat on the angled surface, engines already running, Boyd visible through the cockpit viewport. Gomez had the ramp down. I threw myself up the ramp. Boyd launched before I was strapped in. The shuttle's engines screamed against the gravitational chaos, thrust vectors fighting a pull that shifted direction every few seconds as different dampener sectors failed in sequence. The shuttle clawed through the intake shaft, metal scraping the hull as the walls closed around us. Then open space. Then the black of the system's dim star, and the collapsing temple falling away below us. And the entity, still visible through the rear cameras, hanging in the center of the ruin, its mass unchanged, its silhouette bending the light of the distant sun around its edges as the shell crumpled inward like a fist closing around a stone. It would hold. The entity's gravity was enormous, but without the dampener network, the feeding infrastructure was buried. The procession platforms were crushed. The priest machines were sealed under kilometers of compressed metal. The reservoirs were gone. The growth engine was destroyed, and the entity would remain exactly what it was. A gravitational fossil, massive and inert, its pull strong enough to hold its own wreckage, but reaching no farther. Boyd said nothing during the docking sequence. He said very little during the 11 months of transit back to Foundation territory. His debrief report, which I was permitted to read only in excerpts quoted by the review board during my formal hearing, described me as a specialist who consistently prioritized data acquisition over crew safety, whose recommendations I should have overridden at the first junction. The board agreed with every word. They cleared me of criminal negligence on the grounds that the sabotage had prevented a cascading gravitational event that would have threatened the local stellar neighborhood. But the clearance came with a formal reprimand and a note in my Foundation file that would follow me for the rest of my career. Boyd retired from Expedition Command 4 months after we returned. His 20-year record, once perfect, now carried 3 names. He moved to a colony on Tau Ceti and took a job managing freight logistics. I heard this secondhand. He never contacted me again. Gomez transferred to a different Foundation division within a week of planetfall. I saw him once in the corridor outside the review board's chambers. He looked at me the way people look at a crack in load-bearing concrete. Something noted, measured, and walked around. The Foundation classified the expedition data at the highest level and quarantined the KOI 7211B system. A monitoring station at the system's edge tracked the entity's gravitational signature through the following year. The readings confirmed what Foster had calculated. The mass had stabilized. The collapsed temple held. The growth engine was dead. The feeding infrastructure crushed. The priest machines sealed under kilometers of folded metal. The gravitational fossil sat in its ruined shell, enormous and inert, pulling on nothing beyond its own wreckage. The report took me 3 weeks to write. 412 pages of decoded liturgical architecture, dampener engineering, gravitational theology, calibration mathematics. The most complete xenotheological document ever produced. I wrote it in the clean, precise language the Foundation expected, the language I had been trained in for 20 years. The bodies became specimens. The screaming became crew attrition events. Foster's last transmission became a single line in Appendix C. Engineering specialist Foster confirmed override lockout at approximately 14:37 mission elapsed time. Communications ceased shortly thereafter. The terminology processed everything, flattened it, made it fit inside margins and section headers and citation formats. 3 men turned into data, and the data was immaculate. The academic paper came 8 months later, published under Foundation authorization. The first proof of a cross-species theological framework. The first decoded alien liturgical operating language. The first confirmed instance of gravitational engineering integrated with devotional practice. My name appeared in journals I had spent 2 decades trying to reach. Conference invitations arrived monthly. I accepted them all. I gave talks in auditoriums full of colleagues who wanted to know what it had been like to stand inside a functioning alien temple. And I told them what the data showed, which was always accurate and never whole. The career I had spent 20 years building arrived exactly as I had imagined it. Corner office at the Foundation, senior fellow, grant money, doctoral committees, interview requests. Everything I wanted when I boarded that shuttle. The part I have never put into any report or lecture is simpler than the science and harder to contain. When I fed the silver mouth, when I pressed Farnham's remains into the polished aperture, and the liturgical terminal accepted me as a priest. The corrupted prayer moved through me with a fluency that went past translation. I had designed it as sabotage. I had entered it as engineering. But the mathematical language I had spent 20 years studying shaped itself to my hands the way a hymn shapes itself to a voice that has sung it before. And some part of me that 20 years of academic training should have killed recognized the sacrament for what it was. I fed the god to earn the right to kill it. The words were wrong. The ritual was complete. The difference between those 2 facts is where I have lived professionally and otherwise every day since. Foster's name is on a memorial plaque at the Foundation's headquarters in New London, alongside Farnham's and Beckett's. I pass it on the way to my office. Some mornings I stop. Most mornings I walk past, because stopping has become a ritual of its own, and I have learned what rituals cost.